In every era of fashion, there comes a figure who does not simply walk the runway, but reshapes the very idea of beauty itself. In the 1990s, that figure was not a towering Amazonian goddess like the supermodels before her. She was small, fragile, and almost ordinary in appearance. Yet, from the moment her image first appeared, she unsettled the industry and the world alike. Her name was Kate Moss. Discovered at just 14 years old, she seemed an unlikely candidate for fashion's throne. She lacked the height, the curves, and the polished glamour that defined the era. But what she possessed was something the camera could never ignore. A gaze that was at once distant and intimate, a fragility that carried the weight of defiance, and a presence that whispered rather than shouted, but somehow demanded attention all the same. By the early 1990s, Kate Moss had become the reluctant queen of a cultural shift. The glossy perfection of the supermodel era gave way to something raw, vulnerable, and unnervingly human. This was the dawn of heroin chic, a look that critics condemned as reckless, but which cemented Moss as the face of a generation. She wasn't simply modeling clothes. She was embodying the contradictions of her time. Glamour tainted with fragility, beauty shadowed by darkness. But with that crown came a heavy burden. Kate Moss was not prepared for the storm that followed. Every campaign, every runway, every candid photograph fed a narrative that was no longer hers to control. The world saw not just a model, but a symbol, a lightning rod for debates about fashion, morality, and excess. To the industry, she was indispensable. To the press, she was irresistible. And to the public, she became an icon, as adored as she was scrutinized. Behind the glossy images and iconic campaigns, however, lay a young woman grappling with pressures that no camera could capture. Fame had found her before she had the chance to define herself, and with it came an avalanche of expectations, temptations, and rumors. The image of Kate Moss, the cool, untouchable, almost otherworldly muse, was a mask that concealed the struggles of the girl behind it. And yet, this is what makes her story so compelling. Kate Moss is not remembered because she was perfect. She is remembered because she survived. She stumbled, she fell, she was judged by millions, but each time she returned, her aura somehow stronger, her mystery somehow deeper. Today, her name carries more than nostalgia. It carries a question. How did a girl from Croydon become not only the face of an era, but a legend who endured when so many others vanished? The answer lies not in the perfection of her career, but in the shadows that shaped it, the moments of crisis, scandal, and reinvention that turned Kate Moss from a model into a myth. Kate Moss was born on January 16, 1974, in Croydon, a working-class suburb of South London. Hers was not the childhood of privilege often associated with the fashion world. The daughter of a barmaid and an airline clerk, she grew up in modest surroundings, navigating the turbulence of her parents' divorce during her early teens. Those who knew her then recall a quiet girl, shy, almost withdrawn, who seemed worlds away from the glamorous life that would one day be hers. Nothing in those early years suggested that she would become one of the most recognizable faces of her generation. Her path changed in 1988, at just 14 years old. Returning from a family holiday, she was spotted at JFK Airport by Sarah Dukas, the founder of Storm Model Management. There was nothing conventional about Kate at first glance. She was shorter than most models, her frame was delicate rather than statuesque, her features subtle instead of striking. And yet, there was something in her presence, a raw honesty that the camera could not resist. Dukas sensed it immediately. In that moment, Kate Moss's unlikely journey into fashion began. Her earliest assignments were tentative steps into a world she hardly understood. Photographers were intrigued by her ability to inhabit a frame without dominating it, to suggest a story with the faintest shift of her gaze. She wasn't like the supermodels of the late 1980s, whose every appearance radiated power and opulence. Kate's quiet presence spoke to a different kind of allure, one that felt more intimate, more vulnerable, and somehow more authentic. The turning point came in 1992 with Calvin Klein. Paired alongside a young Mark Wahlberg, Moss appeared in a series of stark black and white images that would redefine fashion advertising. There was no excessive glamour, no polished perfection, just simplicity, rawness, and Kate's unflinching stare. The campaign ignited both fascination and outrage. Critics accused it of glamorizing fragility, but the public could not look away. Kate Moss had become the face of a new era, one that celebrated imperfection as the ultimate expression of beauty. From there, her rise was meteoric. Designers like John Galliano, Gianni Versace, and Alexander McQueen sought her out, drawn to her ability to transform effortlessly into whatever vision they imagined. On the runway, she could shift from ethereal innocence to rebellious danger in a heartbeat. Off the runway, her personal style, simple slip dresses, vintage jackets, unpolished hair, became a cultural blueprint, copied endlessly by young women who saw in her a reflection of themselves. She was, in many ways, an anti-supermodel. At a time when the industry was still enamored with tall, glamorous icons like Cindy Crawford and Claudia Schiffer, Kate Moss was the opposite, small, understated, yet unforgettable. She challenged the very definition of beauty, and in doing so captured the imagination of a generation searching for something real beneath the glossy veneer. But with meteoric success came pressure. Fame had arrived before Kate had a chance to prepare for it. At an age when most young women were discovering who they were, she was already being defined by the world, cast as the poster child of a controversial new aesthetic. While the fashion industry celebrated her, tabloids began to speculate, painting her as both muse and cautionary tale. Even in her early rise, the shadow of scrutiny was never far behind. For every Vogue cover and runway triumph, there were whispers about the toll it was taking on her health and spirit. The same qualities that made her extraordinary, her fragility, her mystery, her rawness, were also the ones that would later place her under the harshest spotlight. Kate Moss had entered fashion as an unlikely outsider, but by the mid-1990s, she was no longer just part of the industry, she was its defining figure. And yet, beneath the triumphs, the first hints of cracks were already beginning to show, foreshadowing the storm that would follow.
By the mid-1990s, Kate Moss was no longer the outsider who had disrupted fashion. She was its very heartbeat. Everywhere one turned, there she was, draped across Calvin Klein billboards that loomed over Times Square, closing runway shows in Paris, staring from the covers of Vogue, Harper's Bazaar, and countless international editions. She was not just a model, she was the pulse of an era. What set Moss apart was her uncanny ability to embody contradictions. She was fragile, yet defiant, understated, yet unforgettable. In an age that had celebrated glamour, excess, and power, Kate introduced something altogether different: subtlety. Her face did not scream for attention, it whispered. And yet, in that whisper, there was something hauntingly magnetic. The world leaned closer, unable to resist. The Calvin Klein campaigns cemented her position, but her reign stretched far beyond a single brand. Gianni Versace draped her in jeweled-toned silks, John Galliano transformed her into a romantic muse, and Alexander McQueen, himself a designer known for blurring beauty and darkness, made her a central figure in his theatrical visions. To each designer, she offered something unique, a blank canvas that absorbed their imagination and reflected it back with a quiet, devastating intensity. She became known as a chameleon, capable of transforming into whatever narrative the fashion world demanded. In one shoot, she could be the embodiment of innocence, barefoot in a meadow with the wistful expression that seemed to hold a secret. In another, she could radiate danger, her stare unflinching, her presence electric. Unlike her predecessors, who embodied a singular ideal of beauty, Moss was elusive, undefinable, a shapeshifter who belonged everywhere and nowhere at once. Her influence spilled beyond the catwalk. Off-duty, her personal style became cultural shorthand for effortless cool. A slip dress paired with combat boots, an oversized jacket over bare legs, tousled hair that looked unstyled yet iconic, all became the hallmarks of the Kate Moss look. She was not chasing trends, she was creating them. Every appearance outside a club or walking the streets of London was treated as fashion inspiration. For a generation, Kate embodied the dream of being stylish without trying, of turning imperfection into allure. Yet, with adoration came relentless scrutiny. The very qualities that made Moss revolutionary also fueled criticism. Her thin frame sparked debates about health and responsibility, with some accusing the industry of glorifying fragility. The term heroin chic, born from her aesthetic, became a cultural lightning rod. Politicians condemned it, newspapers debated it, and critics demanded accountability. Kate Moss, a teenager when she first rose to fame, found herself cast as the face of an entire cultural controversy. Still, she did not fade under the weight of criticism. If anything, it seemed to strengthen her legend. While her detractors accused her of weakening the ideals of beauty, her admirers saw her as liberating them. She had dismantled the rigid standards of the 1980s supermodel era and replaced them with something raw, human, and reachable. Beauty, through Kate Moss, became less about perfection and more about presence. By the late 1990s, she was untouchable in both fame and influence. Designers, photographers, and magazines could not imagine the industry without her. Her peers were household names, but Kate Moss had become something even rarer, a myth in the making. She was everywhere, and yet always mysterious, her true self hidden behind the fleeting expressions captured in photographs. But as her career soared, the shadows followed closely. The fashion world celebrated her, but the tabloids hunted her. Every late night, every romance, every cigarette became public property. Even as she reigned at the top of her profession, the cracks beneath the glamour began to show. For Kate Moss, the peak was dazzling, but it was also precarious. Because the higher she climbed, the sharper the world's gaze became, waiting for the moment when it might all come crashing down.
For all her triumphs on the runway, Kate Moss was never free from the shadows that trailed her. The same fragility that made her so compelling in front of the camera became ammunition for tabloids eager to craft a darker narrative. By the mid-1990s, she was no longer just a model, she was a symbol, and with that came endless speculation, scrutiny, and judgment. Her personal life often overshadowed her professional achievements. The relationship with actor Johnny Depp in the mid-1990s remains one of the most famous chapters of her story. They were fashion's golden couple, beautiful, magnetic, and seemingly inseparable. Yet behind the glamour, their romance was turbulent, marked by passionate highs and bitter lows. When it ended, Moss spiraled into a period of despair, later admitting it was one of the most difficult times of her life. The breakup revealed the fragility behind her cool exterior, a reminder that beneath the icon was a young woman struggling with heartbreak under the gaze of millions. In the early 2000s, her relationship with musician Pete Doherty propelled her further into tabloid infamy. Doherty's chaotic lifestyle and well-documented struggles with substance use bled into the headlines, and Kate found herself portrayed not as the silent muse of fashion, but as a reckless participant in a world of excess. Photographs of their nights out filled newspapers, painting a portrait of a woman teetering on the edge. To her critics, she embodied the dangerous glamour of the very aesthetic she had helped popularize. To her admirers, she was simply a woman living honestly, refusing to sanitize herself for the public's approval. But the whispers turned to shouts in 2005. Grainy images published by a British tabloid appeared to confirm every rumor that had followed her for years. Overnight, the scandal ignited a firestorm.
Major fashion houses, Burberry, H&M, Chanel, rushed to sever ties. Politicians denounced the industry for glamorizing dangerous lifestyles, and Kate Moss became the epicenter of a cultural debate that went far beyond fashion. For the first time since her discovery, her career seemed truly at risk. The pressure was immense. The industry that had once celebrated her now seemed eager to discard her, and the media framed her as a fallen idol. Yet what is striking about Moss in this period is not the scandal itself, but her response. She did not give long confessional interviews. She did not plead with the press for forgiveness. Instead, she offered a brief apology, acknowledged her mistakes, and fell silent. That silence, oddly enough, became her shield. Where others might have broken under the weight of exposure, Kate Moss endured, her mystery intact. Behind the headlines, however, the toll was real. Friends and colleagues spoke of a woman exhausted by the endless pursuit, a person who had been thrust into fame too young and forced to carry its burden for too long. The cracks in her image were not just media inventions. They reflected genuine struggles with identity, relationships, and the suffocating pressures of an industry that demanded perfection while feasting on imperfection. And yet those cracks never shattered her. Instead, they added dimension to her myth. Kate Moss was no longer simply the girl who redefined beauty. She was the woman who embodied both the glamour and the peril of fame. Her imperfections, exposed so publicly, became part of what made her unforgettable. The world had seen her at her most fragile, and still she endured. But endurance comes with a cost, and the question lingered. How long could she walk the line between muse and cautionary tale, between icon and scandal, before one side consumed the other?
The year 2005 was supposed to be just another chapter in Kate Moss's glittering career. She was still on every magazine cover, still the first name designers wanted on their runways, still the face of campaigns that defined the fashion landscape. Yet in September of that year, everything changed. A set of grainy photographs, published by a British tabloid, sent shockwaves across the globe. The images did not show a model in couture or an icon at work. They seemed to expose the darker rumors that had circled her for years. The reaction was swift and merciless. Brands that had built fortunes with her image, Burberry, H&M, Chanel, moved quickly to distance themselves. Contract cancellations mounted, and suddenly Moss, who had once been indispensable, was treated as untouchable. For a brief but brutal period, it seemed as though the career that had defined the 1990s and early 2000s was finished. The press declared it the end of an era, a morality tale about the perils of fame and excess. But while the headlines screamed of her downfall, Moss responded with characteristic restraint. There were no emotional interviews, no desperate attempts at redemption in front of cameras. Instead, she issued a brief statement, acknowledging her mistakes, expressing regret, and then retreating into silence. In an age when scandal often thrived on public confessions, her refusal to play the game was almost radical. It allowed the mystery that had always defined her to remain intact. Behind the scenes, however, the toll was heavy. She faced the collapse of her professional foundation, the glare of relentless media scrutiny, and the judgment of a public eager to decide her fate. For many, this was the moment that would finally break Kate Moss. And yet, remarkably, it did not. Within months, the narrative began to shift. Fashion, it turned out, was not ready to let her go. Designers quietly returned, recognizing that no other model could replicate the aura Moss brought to their work. Vogue welcomed her back to its cover. Contracts once thought lost forever reappeared, larger than before. Even brands that had distanced themselves returned, knowing that scandal had not diminished her power, but paradoxically enhanced it. The crisis that should have ended her career instead solidified her as something more than a model. She became a survivor, a woman who had endured the full force of a public storm and emerged not weakened, but stronger. The very scandal that was meant to destroy her only deepened the myth around her. In retrospect, the 2005 episode revealed two truths. The first was about the fashion industry itself, its capacity for hypocrisy, its eagerness to condemn what it secretly thrived on, and its inability to replace the irreplaceable. The second was about Kate Moss, her resilience, her refusal to let the narrative be written without her, and her uncanny ability to turn vulnerability into power. From the brink of ruin, she returned to the pinnacle of her profession. By the end of the decade, she was not only modeling, but also designing, collaborating with Topshop, and laying the foundations for what would become her agency. What could have been her undoing instead became her rebirth. Yet the memory of that near downfall lingers, like a shadow stretching across her career. It reminds us that beneath the glamour lies fragility, and that the line between triumph and collapse is thinner than we imagine. For Kate Moss, 2005 was not the end. It was the fire through which she passed, and from which she emerged tempered, enduring, and even more enigmatic. The question remains, was it resilience that carried her through, or the world's fascination with seeing her rise and fall again and again? Perhaps it's both, and perhaps that tension is the secret of her survival. In the years that followed her 2005 crisis, Kate Moss did something few thought possible. She not only survived, she thrived. What might have been the closing chapter of her career became instead a new beginning, a reinvention that transformed her from a model into an institution. Her return to fashion was swift and, in its own way, defiant. By 2006, she was back on the cover of Vogue, a statement that the fashion world was unwilling to relinquish its most enigmatic muse. The following year, her collaboration with Topshop launched, drawing crowds that lined up overnight to buy pieces she had designed. It was a turning point. Moss was no longer just the face of campaigns, she was shaping them. She had become both the muse and the creator, expanding her influence beyond the runway. As the years passed, her impact only deepened. Trends that carried her fingerprints, the slip dress, the festival boho look, the effortless pairing of high fashion with thrift store finds, continued to dominate wardrobes across generations. She had an instinct for style that could not be taught or imitated, and her ability to embody both rebellion and elegance kept her at the center of cultural relevance long after most of her peers had faded. In 2016, she cemented her legacy further by launching the Kate Moss Agency. The move symbolized a shift in her story, from being managed, photographed, and defined by others to taking control and guiding new talent. For the first time, she was not just part of fashion's narrative, she was helping to write it. It was a fitting evolution for someone who had spent decades at the mercy of the spotlight to now stand behind it, shaping the careers of others. Her influence has proven timeless. Generations who grew up idolizing her now see her as a survivor, while younger audiences continue to discover her through archives of iconic campaigns, runway shows, and the endless cycle of retro revival. Few figures in fashion have managed to remain relevant across 3 decades, and fewer still have done so after enduring the kind of public scrutiny that nearly destroyed her. But Kate Moss's legacy is not without paradox. To many, she remains a controversial figure, a reminder of fashion's complicity in promoting dangerous ideals of beauty, of the blurred line between inspiration and exploitation. To others, she is the very embodiment of resilience, proof that imperfection can be iconic, and that surviving the storm can be as powerful as avoiding it. What is certain is that Kate Moss changed the way the world understands beauty. Before her, it was statuesque, glamorous, almost unreachable. With her, it became human, fragile, enigmatic, and real. She made imperfection aspirational, and in doing so, opened the door for generations of models who did not fit the traditional mold. Her aftermath is, in many ways, her greatest triumph. She stands today not as a relic of the 1990s, but as a figure who transcended the era, reshaped the industry, and endured its harshest trials. Her story is not simply one of rise and fall, it is a narrative of survival, reinvention, and a legacy that refuses to fade. And yet the mystery remains. Kate Moss has never fully explained herself, never offered the intimate confessions the public so often demands. That silence has become part of her allure. It ensures that her legacy is not just in the photographs or the fashion, but in the unanswered questions that keep us wondering. Kate Moss's journey is not the story of a flawless career, but of an imperfect life lived under the harshest light, and somehow endured. From her beginnings as a shy teenager in Croydon to becoming the face that redefined beauty in the 1990s, her path has been one of defiance, scandal, survival, and reinvention. She never fit the mold of the traditional supermodel, and perhaps that is why she became more than one. Her legacy is not measured solely in the campaigns she fronted or the trends she sparked, but in the way she shifted culture itself. She showed the world that beauty was not only found in glamour and grandeur, but in fragility, subtlety, and imperfection. In doing so, she challenged and changed the standards of her industry, leaving behind a blueprint that continues to shape fashion today. Yet, for all her influence, Kate Moss remains an enigma. She has lived through storms that would have ended other careers, the heartbreaks, the scandals, the public humiliations, and each time she has reemerged, not untouched, but transformed. She carries her scars like shadows, visible yet never fully explained. Her silence has become her armor, her mystery, her greatest strength. In a world where oversharing has become currency, Kate Moss's refusal to reveal everything keeps her allure intact. And perhaps that is the essence of her story. She is not defined by perfection, nor by downfall, but by her resilience. She is the reminder that beauty can be both delicate and enduring, that icons are not born flawless but are forged in the fire of public scrutiny. Her myth endures not because she was untouchable, but because she was touchable, human, fragile, and still able to rise above it all. Today, at over 50, she is no longer the girl on the Calvin Klein billboard, yet her name continues to resonate across generations. She remains a symbol of survival in a culture that delights in tearing down its idols. Kate Moss is proof that even when the cracks appear, even when the world demands your fall, it is possible to stand again, and in standing, to become immortal. So who is Kate Moss, truly? A muse, a survivor, a rebel, or a cautionary tale? The truth may be all of these at once. And perhaps it is in that ambiguity, in the questions she never answers, that her enduring power lies. Her story leaves us with a haunting thought. Legends are not defined by their light alone, but by the shadows that surround them. And Kate Moss, walking forever at the line between both, has ensured that her name will never be forgotten. If you found her story moving, consider subscribing for more Untold Legacies.